Chapter 11, Veiled Intentions. The journey to the Spirit Guild began at dawn, the first light revealing a path where none had been visible the previous evening. Elder Thorn led them through mountain passages that seemed to shift and realign with each turn, landmarks appearing where empty space had been moments before. Familiar terrain suddenly unfamiliar from new angles.
The path knows where we're going,
The elder explained when Zara questioned a particularly impossible transition between steep cliff and gentle meadow.
we simply follow its knowledge.
Lyra walked beside Cassius, close enough that their shoulders occasionally brushed, yet a new tension had settled between them. Something in Elder Thorn's presence, or perhaps in the transition to spirit territory, had resurrected doubts she thought resolved during their confrontation with the incubus. The moon opal at her throat pulsed gently, its cool touch a reminder of protection freely given. Yet now it also felt like visible evidence of a connection that transgressed centuries of separation between their guilds. Not just tactical alliance, but genuine partnership, something unprecedented in Eldervale's rigidly categorized society. As they crested a ridge overlooking a valley shrouded in silver mist, Cassius paused. His violet eyes clouded briefly with spirit sight before clearing to their normal, piercing clarity.
The veil thins here.
He murmured, more to himself than the group. His hand reached for Lyra's, an unconscious gesture she noticed he quickly suppressed when Elder Thorn glanced back at them. The elder's expression revealed nothing, yet something in the aborted movement awakened fresh unease within Lyra. The spirit wilds seemed to amplify emotional currents running beneath practical concerns, each step toward the guild headquarters making their connection feel simultaneously more significant and more impossible.
The mist gate approaches.
Elder Thorn announced, gesturing toward the silvery veil that rippled across the valley below.
The final threshold before guild territory proper.
The mist moved with curious purpose, swirling patterns suggesting consciousness beyond mere atmospheric phenomenon. As they descended toward it, Lyra noticed spectral forms moving within the silvery veil, vague silhouettes that appeared momentarily before dissolving back into formlessness.
Ancestral guardians.
Cassius explained quietly, noting her focused attention.
They assess visitors crossing the threshold.
Will they...
Lyra let the question trail off, uncertain how to articulate her concern about being a fire mage entering spirit territory.
They judge essence rather than guild affiliation.
He assured her, voice dropping to ensure privacy despite their guide's apparent distance ahead.
Intention carries more weight than elemental orientation.
The answer should have provided comfort. Instead, it intensified her unease. What exactly were her intentions? What essence would these ancestral guardians perceive beneath her careful composure? The certainty she had felt after Elder Thorn helped her recognize her error in abandoning Cassius now wavered beneath more complex doubts about the viability of their connection beyond immediate crisis. As they reached the valley floor, the mist thickened around them, transforming from distant veil to encompassing presence that caressed skin with cool fingers of vapor. Lyra shivered, not from physical cold but from the sense of being examined by countless invisible observers. A figure materialized directly before her, not solid, but defined enough to be recognizable as an elderly woman in archaic spirit robes. Her features shifted subtly, sometimes resembling Lyra's own, sometimes entirely foreign, yet always carrying that distinctive quality that marked Spirit Guild lineage.
Flame Daughter.
The apparition addressed her, voice emanating from everywhere and nowhere simultaneously.
You carry fire where few of your kind have ventured willingly.
I come with peaceful purpose,
Lyra replied, the formal response emerging from memories of ancient texts she had studied in secret. Protocol for cross-guild diplomatic exchange long fallen into disuse. The spirit regarded her with penetrating assessment that seemed to bypass surface thoughts to examine deeper motivations.
You seek answers, yet fear the questions themselves.
It observed.
You desire connection, yet tremble before its implications.
Heat rose to Lyra's cheeks at having her private uncertainties exposed so directly. Before she could formulate response, the spirit turned toward Cassius with similar penetrating focus.
Archseer.
It acknowledged, the title carrying both respect and subtle reprimand.
The veil weakens while you pursue personal matters.
Cassius inclined his head, accepting the criticism without defensiveness.
The matters are not merely personal.
He replied.
The boundaries between realms face threats beyond individual concerns.
The spirit seemed to consider this, its form wavering slightly before stabilizing with more defined features. An elderly woman with silver-streaked dark hair and the same violet eyes that marked Cassius's lineage.
Nightshade blood recognizes the pattern.
It conceded.
Though questions remain regarding priority and purpose.
Its attention shifted to where Lyra and Cassius stood close together.
Old boundaries dissolve while new connections form. The balance shifts in directions unseen for generations.
Before either could respond, Elder Thorn stepped forward, making a complex gesture that caused the mist to swirl around his weathered hands.
The council acknowledges your vigilance, ancestor.
He addressed the spirit with formal respect.
And accepts responsibility for guiding both assessment and adaptation as new patterns emerge.
The spirit inclined her head, accepting this intervention with the deference due Elder Thorn's position.
Guide wisely, Elder.
She advised, form already beginning to dissolve back into the surrounding mist.
The path narrows while shadows lengthen.
With those cryptic words, the apparition vanished completely. The mist parted before them, revealing a pathway through the valley that hadn't been visible moments earlier. A road paved with luminescent stones that emitted soft silver light despite the morning sun overhead.
The ancestors' welcome is warmer than many receive.
Elder Thorn observed, moving forward with confident steps that suggested familiarity with the path's twists and turns.
Though not without concerns regarding our combined presence here.
Lyra glanced at Cassius, finding his expression carefully neutral. The scholarly mask she had come to recognize as his defense against emotional complexities. Something in the ancestor's words had affected him deeply, though he worked to conceal it beneath professional composure. The veil weakens while you pursue personal matters. The spirit's reprimand echoed in her memory, carrying implications beyond simple criticism. What responsibilities had Cassius set aside to help her? What duties did his position as Archseer entail that he had neglected during their shared crisis? Questions she couldn't voice in present company, yet which added another layer to her growing uncertainty about the feasibility of their connection beyond temporary alliance against Alek's schemes. The luminescent path led them deeper into the valley, the mist gradually thinning to reveal a landscape unlike anything Lyra had previously encountered. Trees with translucent trunks rose on either side, their branches bearing leaves that seemed to exist in multiple states simultaneously. Solid when viewed directly, transparent when glimpsed peripherally, sometimes appearing to phase entirely out of existence before remanifesting in slightly different positions. Between these impossible trees stood structures that defied conventional architectural principles. Buildings that appeared to grow organically from the surrounding landscape rather than being constructed upon it. Their walls curved and flowed like liquid frozen in complex patterns. Surfaces neither stone nor wood, but something combining properties of both while transcending limitations of either.
The outer sanctum.
Elder Thorn announced as they approached the first cluster of these structures.
Where spirit mages train in fundamental techniques before advancing to more specialized disciplines.
Young apprentices moved through open courtyards, practicing movements that resembled dance more than conventional magical casting. Their hands traced patterns in the air that left brief silvery trails, some maintaining simple geometric shapes, while others attempted more complex configurations that occasionally collapsed into disorganized light before being reformed with renewed concentration. Several apprentices looked up as they passed, curiosity evident at the unusual group, particularly the two women whose elemental affinities clearly differed from the spirit mages surrounding them. One young girl, no more than 12, stared openly at Lyra's flame-red hair, with a mixture of fascination and wariness that reflected centuries of taught separation between their guilds.
They've never seen a fire mage this close.
Cassius murmured, noting the direction of Lyra's attention.
Most will complete their entire training without direct interaction with other elemental practitioners.
The isolation struck Lyra as both familiar and foreign, similar to Fire Guild practices yet fundamentally different in execution. Where fire mages limited outside contact to maintain political advantage, spirit practitioners appeared to do so from necessity born of their unique connection to realms beyond physical perception. As they progressed deeper into guild territory, the structures grew more elaborate, their impossible architecture creating spaces that seemed larger inside than their external dimensions would permit. Windows offered glimpses of rooms where senior mages worked with focused concentration on projects that defied easy categorization. Objects that flickered between visibility and invisibility. Texts whose contents appeared to change when viewed from different angles. Devices with components that seemed to exist in multiple locations simultaneously.
The inner sanctum approaches.
Elder Thorn announced, gesturing toward an area where the mist had never fully dissipated despite the day's advancing light.
Home to the council chambers and the spirit gardens.
The path led them to an archway formed by two massive trees whose trunks had grown together at the top, creating a natural entrance enhanced by subtle magical modifications that caused the wood to emit soft luminescence, similar to the pathstones. Beyond this threshold, the mist thickened again, parting only enough to reveal their immediate surroundings as they passed through.
The gardens require proper introduction.
Elder Thorn explained, noting Lyra's attempt to peer through the concealing vapor.
They reveal themselves according to visitors' readiness rather than curiosity.
Through occasional breaks in the mist, Lyra glimpsed arrangements of plants unlike any she had previously encountered. Flowers whose blossoms existed partly in physical reality and partly in some other dimension, their colors shifting between the normal spectrum and hues she had no names for. Trees bearing fruit that ripened and decayed in continuous cycles measured in minutes rather than seasons. Vines that grew in patterns corresponding to mathematical formulas beyond ordinary comprehension. The air carried scents that changed with each breath. Sometimes recognizable botanical fragrances, other times odors that triggered memories she couldn't consciously access. Occasionally sensations that transcended smell to become something closer to emotional impressions directly absorbed rather than processed through physical senses. In the garden's center stood a structure that defied conventional description. Not precisely a building, but rather a nexus where multiple realities appeared to overlap without fully merging. Its boundaries shifted constantly. Walls, sometimes transparent, sometimes solid, occasionally disappearing completely to reveal interior spaces that themselves contained landscapes larger than the structure's external dimensions could possibly contain.
The Council Nexus.
Elder Thorn identified it, his casual tone belying the extraordinary nature of what they witnessed.
Where the guidance of both living elders and ancestral wisdom converges to address matters transcending individual perception.
As they approached this impossible structure, Lyra noticed Cassius's posture changing. Subtle shifts that suggested increasing tension beneath his scholarly composure. His violet eyes moved constantly, assessing their surroundings with focus that transcended mere vigilance to become something closer to anticipatory wariness.
Elder Thorn?
A voice called from the Nexus entrance, drawing their attention to a figure emerging from the mist-shrouded doorway. An elderly woman with silver hair and sharp features regarded their group with particular focus on Cassius.
The Council has been expecting Archseer Nightshade's return for some time.
The subtle reprimand echoed the ancestral guardian's earlier criticism, reinforcing Lyra's growing awareness of responsibilities Cassius had apparently set aside during their shared crisis.
Elder Moonshadow.
Cassius acknowledged, formal bow containing both respect and subtle apology.
Circumstances required immediate response beyond standard protocols.
So we have gathered.
The elder replied, her tone suggesting thorough assessment rather than hasty judgment. Her gaze shifted to Lyra and Zara, assessment becoming more pointed as she noted their non-spirit guild affiliations.
Though questions remain regarding methods employed and priorities established.
Which the Council will address through proper procedure.
Elder Thorn intervened smoothly, diplomatic experience evident in his redirection from public criticism to formal process.
After necessary accommodations have been arranged for our guests.
Elder Moonshadow inclined her head, accepting this adjustment while clearly reserving judgment regarding their presence.
The Eastern Pavilion has been prepared,
she informed them,
for the Fire Mage and her companion.
Her emphasis on Lyra's elemental affiliation carried neither hostility nor welcome, merely acknowledgement of significant deviation from standard practice.
And the Vale Gardens await the Archseer's attention,
she added, turning back to Cassius with more pointed purpose.
The thinning has accelerated during your absence.
Something flickered across Cassius's features. Concern quickly masked beneath professional acknowledgement.
I will attend to it immediately,
he assured her, the promise carrying weight beyond simple professional obligation. Lyra felt fresh uncertainty curl through her chest at this exchange. The thinning clearly referenced some duty specific to Cassius's position as archseer, responsibility he had neglected while helping her escape Alek's influence and counter the incubus's threat.
I'll escort our guests to their accommodations,
Elder Thorn offered.
while Archseer Nightshade addresses his obligations to the Vale.
The division of responsibilities felt suddenly, painfully appropriate. A reminder of the fundamental separations that existed between their lives despite the connection they had discovered. Not just different guilds, but different purposes, different obligations, different fundamental orientations toward magic and its applications. As they prepared to separate, Cassius turned to Lyra with carefully controlled expression that nonetheless failed to completely mask the conflict beneath.
I'll find you when my duties permit.
He said, the formal phrasing carrying personal meaning beyond its surface courtesy.
Of course.
Lyra replied, maintaining matching composure despite the sudden hollow sensation in her chest.
Your responsibilities must take priority.
Something like pain flickered through his violet eyes at her ready acceptance of their separation, though he masked it quickly. With a formal bow that somehow contained more personal regret than any elaborate farewell might have conveyed, he turned and followed Elder Moonshadow into the misty depths of the spirit gardens. Elder Thorn watched this exchange with perceptive assessment that suggested understanding beyond what either had verbally expressed.
The Eastern Pavilion awaits,
He said after Cassius had disappeared from view.
one of few structures designed with non-spirit practitioners in mind.
As they followed him along winding garden paths, Lyra found herself cataloging details with almost desperate focus. Anything to distract from the sudden emptiness Cassius's departure had created. The moon opal at her throat felt heavier somehow, its cool presence a reminder of the connection currently stretched by more than physical distance. The Eastern Pavilion proved unexpectedly welcoming. A graceful structure with solid walls, rather than the partially ephemeral boundaries characteristic of most Spirit Guild architecture. Its windows remained conventional glass, rather than the fluid transitions between realities that marked buildings designed primarily for spirit practitioners.
A diplomatic residence?
Elder Thorn explained as they entered a circular central chamber furnished with comfortable simplicity.
For the rare occasions when representatives from other guilds require extended accommodation.
How rare? Zara asked, diplomatic training providing framework for gathering information through casual conversation.
This particular pavilion last housed visitors over 70 years ago.
The elder replied with hint of smile that suggested awareness of her information-gathering technique.
When Water Guild ambassadors sought assistance regarding unexplained tidal anomalies requiring cross-elemental consultation.
The revelation settled over Lyra with uncomfortable weight, tangible evidence of how unusual their presence here truly was. Not merely unexpected visitors, but unprecedented alliance that violated centuries of established separation between elemental practices.
Rest and refresh yourselves.
Elder Thorn suggested, gesturing toward side chambers containing sleeping accommodations and bathing facilities.
I'll return when the council is prepared to receive your account of recent events.
When the elder had departed, leaving them alone in the unfamiliar space, Zara turned to Lyra with studied casualness that failed to mask her underlying concern.
So,
She began, settling into one of the comfortable chairs positioned around a low table at the chamber's center.
Are we going to discuss what happened back there?
Nothing happened.
Lyra replied too quickly, busying herself with examining the pavilion's architectural details to avoid meeting her friend's perceptive gaze.
Precisely my point.
Zara countered, diplomatic training providing perfect balance between persistence and tact.
The emotional temperature dropped faster than a water mage's temper when Cassius disappeared into those gardens.
Lyra sighed, abandoning her pretense of architectural interest to join her friend at the table. The moon opal seemed to pulse in time with her heartbeat, the sensation both comforting and unsettling in its constant reminder of the connection it represented.
Did you see how quickly he reverted to formal archseer mode?
She asked, the question emerging before she could properly examine the insecurity beneath it.
How seamlessly he stepped back into his guild responsibilities.
And this troubles you because...
Zara prompted when Lyra didn't immediately continue.
Because it was so easy for him.
Lyra admitted, giving voice to fear that had been growing since their arrival in spirit territory.
As if everything between us was temporary exception rather than...
She trailed off, uncertain how to complete the thought without sounding naively romantic or embarrassingly vulnerable.
Rather than genuine connection that might transcend the current crisis?
Zara suggested. Perceptiveness cutting directly to core truths Lyra herself had been avoiding.
Yes.
The simple acknowledgement carried emotional weight beyond its syllable.
What if all of this...
She gestured vaguely, encompassing everything that had developed between her and Cassius since her staged death.
What if it's just exceptional circumstance rather than sustainable reality?
Zara studied her with the penetrating focus that had made her such effective diplomat despite her relative youth.
You're afraid it won't survive the return to the normal guild separation,
she observed.
That once the crisis passes, the fundamental boundaries will reassert themselves and make whatever you've discovered together impossible to maintain.
The assessment struck with uncomfortable precision. Lyra stared at her hands, suddenly finding them fascinating alternative to meeting her friend's perceptive gaze.
It's not just guild separation,
she said finally.
It's everything else too. His responsibilities here, whatever this veil duty entails. My father's expectations once he discovers I'm alive. The political ramifications of crossing elemental boundaries beyond tactical necessity.
Each obstacle emerged more clearly articulated than the last. Lyra's analytical mind cataloging barriers to the relationship with the same precision she applied to complex magical workings.
The fire and spirit guilds have maintained separation for centuries because elemental incompatibility makes sustainable connection impossible.
She continued, reciting traditional justifications she had been taught since childhood.
What if they're right? What if what we've experienced is just temporary alignment rather than a genuinely compatible connection?
Zara leaned back in her chair, diplomatic assessment yielding to more personal engagement.
Is that what you believe?
She asked simply.
Or what you fear others believe?
The question penetrated Lyra's cascading doubts with unexpected clarity. She closed her eyes, fingers rising to touch the moon opal at her throat. Tangible evidence of the harmony they had already achieved despite supposedly insurmountable elemental differences.
I don't know,
she admitted, vulnerability easier to voice with her oldest friend than it would have been with almost anyone else.
The connection feels real when we're working together. When our magics align in ways that should be impossible according to guild doctrine. But then I see him here, in his natural environment, stepping back into responsibilities I don't understand and can't share.
And you wonder if you're just a temporary detour from his real life?
Zara concluded, perception cutting directly to heart of the insecurity Lyra had been struggling to articulate even to herself.
Yes.
Simple acknowledgement of fear that had been growing since their arrival in spirit territory.
Just as I must eventually return to Fire Guild politics and my father's expectations. Whatever they might be once he learns I survived.
Zara studied her with uncharacteristic silence. Diplomatic calculation visibly yielding to deeper friendship as she considered how best to address Lyra's concerns. When she finally spoke, her tone carried genuine care beneath practical assessment.
Have you actually asked him?
She inquired, the simple question carrying layers of meaning.
About how he views your connection beyond the current crisis? About what he envisions once the immediate threats are addressed? About whether he considers you temporary diversion or something worth fighting the established boundaries to maintain?
Lyra shook her head, sudden heat rising to her cheeks at this direct confrontation with her own avoidance of explicit discussion. They had acknowledged attraction, had even acted upon it physically, yet had somehow skipped the crucial conversation about what exactly they were building together, and whether it could survive beyond present circumstances.
I've been afraid to ask,
she confessed, honesty made possible by years of friendship that had witnessed both her strengths and vulnerabilities.
afraid of being the naive romantic who imagined of lasting connection, where only something temporary exists. Afraid of pressuring him to consider a future he hasn't freely offered. Afraid of
being vulnerable,
Zara completed for her when words faltered.
of risking rejection if you acknowledge how deeply you've come to care for him.
The simple truth hung between them. Lyra's silence confirmation enough of its accuracy. Her fingers traced unconscious patterns on the table's polished surface. Fire sigils for protection and containment. An instinctive reaction to the emotional exposure, even with her closest friend.
the High Councilor's perfect daughter doesn't admit to messy feelings that transcend political calculation.
She said finally, self-awareness tinged with soft bitterness.
Especially not for a spirit mage whose very existence represents transgression against centuries of enforced separation.
Perhaps that's precisely why it matters.
Zara suggested, leaning forward to interrupt Lyra's nervous sigil tracing with gentle hand atop hers.
If what you've discovered together actually represents a possibility beyond established rules.
The perspective shift penetrated Lyra's spiraling doubts with unexpected clarity. Not just a personal connection, but potential revolution. Not merely private happiness, but public demonstration that guild separation represented political construct rather than magical necessity. High stakes indeed. Far beyond romantic fulfillment to touch societal transformation that powerful interests would resist with considerable force.
What if we're wrong?
She whispered, giving voice to doubt that had lingered beneath emerging hope.
What if centuries of separation exist for a genuine reason beyond political control? What if the sustained connection between fire and spirit actually proves destructive over time despite our initial harmony?
What if you're right?
Zara countered, diplomatic training providing perfect balance between acknowledging legitimate concerns and preventing them from overwhelming potential progress.
What if what you've discovered together represents a truth long buried beneath political convenience? What if harmony rather than separation provides a stronger foundation for elemental balance?
The questions hung between them, weighty with implications that extended far beyond Lyra's personal happiness to challenge foundational structures upon which Eldervale's magical society had been constructed for generations. Before she could formulate response, A distinctive shimmer in the air announced Elder Thorn's return. The elder materialized from swirling mist that hadn't been present moments earlier. His weathered features set in formal expressions suggesting official business rather than casual visit.
The council requests your presence.
He announced without preamble.
Recent developments require an immediate consultation regarding the incubus you successfully banished.
Alarm flashed through Lyra at this unexpected summons.
Has something happened?
She asked, rising from her seat with unconscious grace that belied her internal tension.
Has it escaped the binding somehow?
Not precisely.
Elder Thorn replied, his careful phrasing suggesting complexity beyond simple containment failure.
But evidence suggests it represented only an initial incursion rather than isolated threat.
Fresh dread curled through Lyra's chest at this confirmation of fears they had already discussed earlier.
Others have crossed the boundary,
she concluded, the pieces fitting together with disturbing clarity.
So it appears.
The elder confirmed, gesturing toward the pavilion's entrance with formal courtesy that nonetheless carried unmistakable urgency.
The council chambers await your first-hand account of your encounter with the entity you knew as Enkinador.
The formal name, one Lyra hadn't heard before, sent chill down her spine despite the pavilion's comfortable temperature. Not a generic incubus, but specific entity, known by identification that implied a previous history within the Spirit Guild records. As they followed Elder Thorn back into the misty gardens, Lyra felt the moon opal pulse once against her throat. A gentle warning rather than comfort. Alert rather than reassurance. Something had changed during their brief respite in the Eastern Pavilion, the threat evolving beyond what they had initially understood. In the distance, silver light flared briefly above the area where Cassius had disappeared earlier to attend his veil duties. The illumination carried a quality beyond ordinary magical working, a purpose Lyra couldn't identify from the distance, yet which somehow resonated with the moon opal's warning pulse against her skin. Possibility beyond artificial constraint, Zara had suggested. Revolution rather than mere exception. High stakes indeed for a connection that transgressed centuries of enforced separation. Stakes that had just risen considerably if the incubus they had banished represented merely an initial incursion rather than isolated threat. As they approached the council nexus, mist swirling more thickly around their path with each step, Lyra found herself wishing Cassius walked beside her, rather than attending separate duties in the distant garden. Not just emotional preference, but tactical advantage. Their magics had proven remarkably complementary against the incubus and Enkinador. Partnership they might need again sooner than anyone had anticipated, regardless of unanswered questions about its sustainability.
I can't.
He began, apology evident in his voice despite the desperate effort to maintain his portion of the barrier.
You don't have to,
Lyra assured him, fingers intertwining with his as she anchored their physical connection to match magical resonance.
Let me carry more. Trust our balance to adapt.
The moon opal flared with sudden brilliance as their fingers interlaced, its energy flowing through both simultaneously as the connection deepened. Not fire-supporting spirit, or spirit-enhancing fire, but true synthesis that transcended individual elements to create something more. Power surged through their joined hands, the barrier transforming from separate elements working in concert to unified whole that carried properties of both yet existed as neither. The crack in the veil responded to this new pressure, edges drawing together as the entities beyond howled in frustrated hunger at the opportunity suddenly denied. With a final, desperate effort, Lyra and Cassius pushed together, the synthesized energy flowing from their joined hands with an intensity that sealed the breach completely. The veil rippled once more, then stabilized into its normal configuration, showing no evidence of the near-catastrophic failure moments earlier. As the immediate danger passed, Cassius's legs buckled beneath him, complete exhaustion claiming what little strength remained after his extended battle before Lyra's arrival. She caught him as he collapsed, lowering him gently to the garden's strange ground that shifted between solid earth and ephemeral energy, depending on how directly one observed it.
You came?
He whispered, violet eyes struggling to remain focused as consciousness wavered precariously.
Despite the containment protocols, despite everything logical that should have kept you safely in the pavilion.
Of course I came.
Lyra replied, the simple truth emerging without calculation or qualification.
Together, remember? Not just convenient slogan, but actual truth.
The faintest smile touched his lips before exhaustion claimed final hold on his consciousness. As his eyes closed, the Vale Gardens shimmered around them, reality reconfiguring in response to the immediate threat's resolution. The mist returned, thicker than before, yet somehow less concealing to Lyra's perception, as if her collaboration in defending the Vale had granted her an understanding beyond her fire magic's awareness. She held Cassius's unconscious form, the weight both a physical burden and inexplicable comfort, as silver light began gathering around them without an apparent source. Elderthorn appeared from the mist, his weathered features revealing both concern at Cassius's condition and something like wonder at the sealed breach behind them.
Impossible?
The elder murmured, gaze moving between unconscious archseer and the Vale's now stable surface.
Yet undeniably accomplished.
Lyra met his perceptive gaze without apology for breaking containment protocols, or concern for whatever consequences might follow.
He needed help,
She stated simply, the words carrying both a personal commitment and a practical assessment of desperate situation.
I provided it. Together we sealed the breach.
Elderthorn studied her with unnerving intensity, perceptions seemingly extending beyond physical appearance to the essence beneath. After a long moment, he nodded once. Not forgiveness exactly, but acknowledgement of actions justified by circumstances despite violation of established rules.
The veil holds,
He confirmed, attention returning to Cassius's unconscious form.
though questions remain regarding the entity's specific target and coordinated assault.
Pyreholm.
Lyra said with absolute certainty, the glimpse through the widened crack having confirmed her worst fears.
They were trying to create a passage directly to the city, bypassing the normal boundaries between realms.
The elder's expression darkened at this confirmation.
Deliberate targeting of location with natural threshold vulnerabilities and minimal defense against such entities.
They need to be warned.
Lyra insisted, concern for her home overshadowing the immediate relief at Breach's closure. Elderthorn nodded, the decision apparently made beyond need for formal council consultation given the immediate danger.
Archseer Nightshade requires rest to recover his strength.
He said, gesturing toward Cassius's unconscious form.
Once restored, he will accompany you to deliver the necessary warning to Pyreholm's leadership.
The authorization carried a significance beyond travel arrangements. Acknowledgement that separation between guilds must yield to common threat. That fire and spirit working together was a necessary response to the danger transcending individual territorial concerns. As Elderthorn gathered additional spirit mages to transport Cassius to recovery chambers, Lyra maintained her position beside his unconscious form, the moon opal's gentle pulse against her throat, matching the rhythm of his steady breathing narrator. The stable hand never stood a chance. Valric had spent 17 uneventful years in the Spirit Guild's service, tending to the ethereal mounts that carried senior mages through both physical and spiritual planes. He'd memorized every rule about strangers, every warning about outsiders, every protocol for unexpected visitors. None of it mattered when she appeared at the stable's edge just after sunset.
"Please,"
she called, her voice carrying a tremor that bypassed his caution and went straight to his protective instincts.
"I've lost my way in the mist."
Valric stepped from the stables, lantern raised. The woman stood half hidden in shadow, her form indistinct yet unmistakably feminine. Guild protocols dictated he should alert the perimeter guardians immediately. Instead, he moved closer.
"The outer gates are sealed after sunset,"
he said, protocol becoming excuse for conversation.
"How did you..."
She stepped into the lantern light, and Valric's question died in his throat. Her beauty struck him like physical force. Not conventional attractiveness, but something that shifted to match his deepest, unacknowledged preferences. Dark hair that caught the light in precisely the way he'd always found captivating. Eyes exactly the shade he'd dreamed of, but never articulated. Lips curved in a smile that seemed designed specifically for him.
"Such a fortunate accident,"
she murmured, her voice caressing each syllable.
"To find someone so capable in this confusing place."
The lantern trembled in his hand. Guild training demanded he maintain distance from unauthorized visitors. Instead, he found himself stepping closer, drawn by a compulsion that felt like his own desire, yet somehow exceeded any attraction he'd previously experienced.
I shouldn't..."
he began. Her fingertips brushed his cheek, the slight contact sending jolts of pleasure cascading through his body.
"You work so hard,"
she whispered, leaning closer.
"Always following rules, always reliable, but never appreciated as you deserve."
The words pierced Valric's carefully hidden insecurities with devastating accuracy. Her scent enveloped him, an intoxicating fragrance that reminded him of every pleasant memory he'd ever experienced, yet belonged to none of them.
"There's a bottle of spirit wine in my quarters,"
he heard himself saying, protocol forgotten entirely.
"Perhaps you'd like to warm yourself before."
Before what? He couldn't articulate. It didn't seem to matter. Nothing mattered except her smile, her touch, her approving nod.
"Lead the way,"
she purred, as Valric turned toward his modest quarters attached to the stables. He failed to notice the shadows behind her coalescing into a masculine form. Darkness gathering purpose as it followed their retreating figures. Inside his small room, Valric fumbled with the bottle, his hands trembling with anticipation he couldn't quite explain. When he turned, the woman stood directly before him, impossibly close without having made a sound.
Your kindness deserves reward,
she murmured. Her kiss obliterated thought. Pleasure beyond anything he'd experienced flooded Valric's senses, his consciousness drowning beneath waves of ecstasy that transcended physical sensation. He never noticed when the door opened again. Never saw the shadow enter. Never felt consciousness slipping away as his essence drained into the woman's hungry embrace. The stable hand's body collapsed to the floor, empty-eyed yet still breathing. The woman straightened, her beauty shifting subtly as she relinquished the specific configuration designed to ensnare his particular desires.
Sloppy,
remarked the shadowy figure, now fully materialized as a tall man with features handsome enough to be instantly forgettable.
You took more than necessary.
The woman shrugged, satisfaction evident in her languorous movements.
I was hungry, and his essence was,
she smiled, licking her lips,
appealingly innocent.
The man knelt beside Valric's unconscious form, studying his features with clinical detachment.
He'll serve our purpose,
he decided, placing a hand on the stable hand's forehead.
Hide him while I take his shape.
The transformation happened in nauseating stages, the man's features liquefying before reshaping themselves into perfect replication of Valric's unremarkable face. His body contorted, bones cracking as they reconfigured to match the stable hand's shorter, stockier build. Within moments, 2 identical Valrics occupied the small room. The woman dragged the unconscious original toward a ladder leading to the hayloft.
How long before someone notices?
She asked, hefting the dead weight with inhuman strength.
Long enough,
the false Valric replied, voice perfectly matching the stable hand's tenor. He picked up the wine bottle, placing it conspicuously beside the unconscious man.
A simple tale of overindulgence will buy us the time we need.
Once the original Valric was concealed beneath hay bales, the false stable hand straightened his clothing and nodded to his companion.
Change your appearance,
he instructed.
Something ordinary. We need access to the inner sanctum without drawing attention.
The beautiful woman's form rippled, beauty melting away like wax beneath flame. In its place stood a plain-faced woman with brown hair and forgettable features. The kind of person whose face slipped from memory moments after seeing it.
Better?
She asked, her voice now lacking the hypnotic quality that had entranced the stable hand.
Perfect.
The false Valric approved.
Now let's find our lord's lost little bird.
The Spirit Guild Council chamber defied conventional spatial understanding. Lyra stood before a semicircular table that seemed simultaneously close enough to touch and impossibly distant. 7 elders occupied ornate chairs that occasionally phased partially out of visibility before reappearing. The transitions creating unsettling sense that reality itself remained negotiable within these walls.
We appreciate your first-hand account of the entity,
Elder Thorn said, his weathered features more defined than his fellow council members, who seemed to flicker between age states depending on which angle Lyra viewed them from.
The details confirm our suspicions regarding its identity.
You knew of this, Encanador?
Lyra asked, the formal name still foreign on her tongue despite having used it throughout her report. A different elder leaned forward, a woman whose silver hair occasionally shifted to midnight black when she moved.
The archives record Encanador's previous manifestations,
she explained, her voice echoing slightly as if reaching Lyra from greater distance than the table's apparent position suggested.
3 documented incursions over the past 7 centuries, each targeting lineages with unusually strong ancestral connections.
Lyra felt Zara shift beside her, diplomatic training making her friend sensitive to the implications beneath formal briefing.
You believe Lyra was targeted specifically because of her family's ancestral flame patterns?
Zara observed, phrasing it as statement rather than question.
Indeed,
confirmed a third elder, his features older than the others, skin like parchment stretched over ancient bones.
the Embersong line maintains particularly robust connections across the Vale between living and ancestral flame practitioners, a valuable resource for any entity seeking to establish permanent presence in our realm.
The clinical assessment sent a chill down Lyra's spine despite the chamber's comfortable temperature. Not random victim, but deliberately selected target, chosen for specific magical attributes in ways that echoed Alek's calculated interest in her family's lineage. Her fingers rose unconsciously to touch the moon opal at her throat, its cool presence providing grounding amid the chamber's perceptual distortions. The connection to Cassius it represented felt distant here. Not severed, but attenuated, stretched thin by more than physical separation. His absence from the council meeting bothered her more than she wanted to acknowledge. The duties that had called him away remained mysterious, referred to only as Vale obligations with no further explanation offered. Another reminder of how little she truly understood about his position within this guild. His responsibilities as Archseer. His life beyond their temporary alliance against the common threat.
The archives indicate Enkinador never manifests alone,
continued the silver-haired elder, drawing Lyra's attention back to immediate concerns.
Previous incursions followed a pattern of an initial agent establishing a foothold here before facilitating passage for others of its kind.
Others?
Zara asked, voicing the question Lyra had been about to articulate.
You mean additional incubi?
And their counterparts.
The ancient elder confirmed, his paper-thin hands forming a steeple before his face.
Where incubi go, succubi inevitably follow. Different manifestations of the same fundamental threat.
Lyra exchanged glances with Zara, both recognizing the escalating danger this represented. Not isolated incident, but a coordinated incursion. A pattern suggesting a broader strategy beyond Alek's specific interest in controlling her through the fire opal necklace.
If Enkinador has been banished to the void,
Lyra reasoned aloud, analytical mind engaging despite emotional turmoil.
How would others cross the boundary? Wouldn't they require similar vessel or anchor in our realm?
Elder Thorn nodded approval at her logical question.
Typically, yes. Initial manifestation requires significant effort. Binding ritual, willing vessel, physical anchor. Subsequent crossings become easier once the first entity establishes a presence.
Like creating a path through a previously impenetrable barrier.
The silver-haired elder elaborated.
The first traveler carves the initial passage with great difficulty. Those following benefit from the partially weakened boundary.
Unease coiled tighter in Lyra's chest at this explanation. The incubus, Enkinador, had been bound to the necklace, then freed when she staged her death to escape Alek's influence. Its brief freedom before their banishment ritual might have been sufficient to begin weakening the boundaries for others to follow.
Can they track Enkinador across the void?
She asked, voicing the fear that had been growing since the council first requested her presence.
Find me through whatever connection remains despite the banishment.
The elders exchanged glances that transcended normal visual communication. Something passing between them that existed beyond ordinary perception. After this silent conference, Elder Thorn turned back to her with grave expression.
The banishment you performed was masterfully executed,
He assured her.
particularly given the improvised nature of your working. However, such entities maintain connections beyond physical proximity or dimensional boundaries. A thread remains, however tenuous.
The confirmation of her fear landed with physical impact. Lyra's fingers tightened around the moon opal, its cool surface warming slightly beneath her touch as if responding to her heightened emotion.
Then I've led them here.
She concluded, guilt slicing through her with cold precision.
My presence endangers the Spirit Guild, just as it endangered Cassius and Zara in Pyreholm.
You misunderstand the nature of such tracking.
The ancient elder interjected, paper-thin hand rising in a corrective gesture.
Distance holds little meaning to entities that exist partially beyond physical constraints. Your location, here, Pyreholm, or distant mountain peak, makes minimal difference to their ability to sense the residual connection.
What matters is the strength of the boundary between realms.
Elder Thorn added, his tone suggesting a critical distinction rather than mere reassurance.
Which is precisely what Archseer Nightshade attends to currently in the Vale Gardens.
The mention of Cassius prompted fresh awareness of his absence, of duties that had claimed him immediately upon arrival. Duties she knew nothing about despite the connection that had developed between them with such unexpected speed and intensity.
The veil grows thin regardless of your presence here.
The silver-haired elder stated, her alternating black and silver tresses catching light in hypnotic patterns.
The ancestral warnings preceded your arrival by considerable margin. The weakening transcends your specific situation, though Enkinador clearly sought to exploit it through your unique ancestral connections.
This broader context simultaneously relieved Lyra's immediate guilt and deepened her concern about the larger threat they faced. Not just personal danger, but systemic vulnerability. Weakening boundaries that threaten the entire realm, rather than merely her individual safety.
Is there anything we can do to strengthen these boundaries?
Zara asked, diplomatic training translating concern into practical inquiry about potential solutions.
Archseer Nightshade works to that purpose even now.
Elder Thorn replied.
His particular talents prove especially suited to Vale maintenance, which explains the urgency of his duties upon his return to Guild territory.
Another reference to Cassius's special abilities, to responsibilities Lyra understood only in vague outline. The repeated reminders of how little she knew about this aspect of his life intensified her earlier doubts about their connection.
When binding rituals fail and boundaries weaken,
The ancient elder continued, apparently oblivious to Lyra's emotional turmoil.
entities typically target specific locations where natural thresholds already exist. Places where realities naturally overlap or magical currents converge.
Like Pyreholm,
Lyra concluded, the pieces fitting together with disturbing clarity.
built over volcanic vents that connect to deeper fire magic, positioned along ley lines that predate the guild formations.
Precisely.
Elder Thorn confirmed, approval evident at her quick grasp of implications.
Which makes your city particularly vulnerable should a coordinated incursion occur.
The council chamber's distorted space seemed to press closer as Lyra processed these revelations. The Elder's semi-spectral forms somehow more substantial as the threat's magnitude crystallized in her understanding. Not just personal danger, but an existential threat to her home. Her father, everyone she had left behind in staging her death to escape Alek's influence.
We need to warn them,
she said, the words emerging with absolute certainty despite the complexities such warning would create.
My father, the Fire Guild. They have no experience with such entities or understanding of the threat they represent.
A warning delivered by a woman believed dead creates many complications,
the silver-haired elder observed, diplomatic understatement making the point more effectively than a direct statement might have achieved.
I'll find a way,
Lyra insisted, determination crystallizing beyond the immediate logistical challenges.
If Pyreholm faces a threat of demonic incursion while believing me dead and Cassius absent, they stand no chance against a coordinated attack.
The Council recognizes the validity of your concern,
Elder Thorn acknowledged,
and will consider an appropriate response once Archseer Nightshade completes his current duties and provides an assessment of the Vale's stability.
The carefully measured response, neither rejecting her urgency nor committing to immediate action, carried a familiar political caution that transcended guilds, regardless of affinity. Fire or spirit, Elder Councils operated with similar procedural restraint, regardless of urgency. Before Lyra could press for more a definitive commitment, a disturbance rippled through the chamber's distorted space. Not a physical interruption, but metaphysical disruption that caused the Elder's semi-spectral forms to flicker more pronouncedly than before.
The veil,
the ancient elder murmured, paper-thin hands rising in a warding gesture.
Something breaches.
Elder Thorn stood, his weathered features hardening into a mask of focused purpose that transformed his scholarly demeanor into a warrior's readiness.
Council adjourned,
he announced, the formal phrasing betrayed by underlying tension in his voice. The other elders vanished without further ceremony, their semi-spectral forms simply ceasing to maintain a presence within the chamber. Elder Thorn alone remained, his attention directed not toward Lyra and Zara, but toward something beyond physical perception.
What's happening?
Zara demanded, diplomatic reserve yielding to the practical concern at the Council's abrupt disappearance.
Breach confirmed,
Elder Thorn replied, attention still focused elsewhere despite apparent response to her question.
The Vale Gardens, Archseer Nightshade engaged.
Lyra's heart seized at those final words, understanding crystallizing with terrible clarity.
Cassius,
she whispered, fingers tightening around the moon opal with unconscious intensity.
He's fighting something coming through from the other side.
Defending the boundary,
Elder Thorn corrected, his focus finally returning to their physical presence.
He is preventing a full manifestation rather than engaging entities already crossed.
The technical clarification did nothing to alleviate Lyra's growing fear for Cassius's safety. If the Council's reaction indicated anything, the threat he faced exceeded normal boundary maintenance by a considerable margin.
Can we help?
She asked, the question emerging before conscious consideration of what such help might entail, or whether her fire magic would prove relevant to the spiritual boundary defense. Elder Thorn shook his head, regret evident beneath professional focus.
Vale maintenance requires specialized training and perception beyond conventional magical application,
he explained.
Unprepared assistance, however well-intentioned, risks compounding the breach rather than reinforcing it.
The explanation made logical sense even as it intensified Lyra's frustration at being unable to help Cassius face whatever threatened the boundary he defended. Another stark reminder of the different worlds they inhabited.
Return to the Eastern Pavilion,
Elder Thorn instructed, gesturing toward the chamber's exit that had somehow moved closer despite neither they nor it having physically changed position.
Security protocols include visitor containment until the threat assessment concludes.
Containment?
Zara echoed, diplomatic training making her particularly sensitive to terminology that suggested restriction rather than recommendation.
Are we to consider ourselves confined?
For your protection, rather than mistrust of your intentions.
Elder Thorn assured them, though the distinction offered little practical difference in terms of their limited options.
Guild defenses activate automatically during confirmed breaches, creating protective barriers that differentiate between recognized and unrecognized magical signatures.
And we qualify as unrecognized,
Lyra concluded, understanding the implicit danger such automatic defenses might present to fire mages within spirit territory during security protocols designed for entities with vastly different magical signatures.
Indeed.
The Elder confirmed.
The pavilion's specific design includes exemption from certain defensive measures, making it the safest location for non-spirit practitioners during active security response.
Before either could argue further, reality shifted around them. Not their movement through space, but space's reconfiguration around their stationary position. The council chamber dissolved, replaced by the Eastern Pavilion's solid walls and conventional dimensions.
That was...
Zara began, blinking as she adjusted to their sudden translocation.
disconcerting.
Lyra finished for her, familiar enough with her friend's diplomatic understatement to recognize when stronger terminology better captured their shared experience. They found themselves standing in the pavilion's central room exactly as they had left it earlier. Comfortable furnishings arranged around a low table, windows offering views of gardens now shrouded in mist that moved with greater purpose than before. The difference lay not in the pavilion itself, but in the quality of its separation from the surrounding guild territory. Boundaries somehow more defined, more solid than they had been prior to the council meeting. Contained indeed, however diplomatically Elder Thorn had phrased it. Lyra moved to the nearest window, frustration building as she searched for any glimpse of what might be happening in the Vale Gardens, where Cassius apparently battled whatever had breached the boundary between realms. The mist offered only occasional flashes of light in the distance, silver illumination suggesting great magical working. The moon opal pulsed against her throat with increasing urgency, its cool touch warming slightly as if responding to heightened emotion or distant danger. The connection it represented felt simultaneously more tenuous and more critical as unseen threats manifested somewhere within the Spirit Guild's otherwise impenetrable defenses.
We can't just wait here while Cassius fights alone,
she said, turning from the window with a determined expression.
There must be some way we can help, specialized training or not.
Zara studied her with diplomat's perceptive assessment, friendship allowing her to recognize the determination beneath her composure that might have fooled less attentive observer.
I agree,
she said simply. The loyalty warmed something within Lyra, even as concern for Cassius continued building with each distant flash of silver light visible through the mist-shrouded windows. Whatever breach he faced, whatever entities threatened the boundary he defended, facing it alone represented a risk beyond wisdom. The moon opal pulsed again, more insistently this time, the sensation less like a simple temperature change, and more like an actual communication. Urgency without specific content, warning without defined threat. Lyra's fingers rose to touch it, focus narrowing to its cool surface as she attempted to interpret the unfamiliar signal.
It's trying to tell me something,
she murmured, awareness shifting from physical properties to magical resonance within the stone.
About Cassius, about whatever he's fighting.
Zara moved closer, scholarly interest in the unfamiliar magical phenomenon temporarily overshadowing her diplomatic reserve.
Can you understand it?
She asked, studying the opal with focused attention that sought some pattern beneath the apparent randomness.
Not words exactly,
Lyra replied, concentration narrowing as she attempted to interpret sensations the stone conveyed.
More like emotions, urgency, danger, and something else.
She frowned, struggling to translate the impression into concrete terminology.
Connection under strain, like thread pulled too tight, about to snap.
The description captured something essential in the opal's communication, yet missed some quality she couldn't quite articulate. A sense that the information received represented a filtered version of a more complex message, a translation lacking nuance of original content. Another flash of silver light illuminated the mist beyond their windows, brighter than previous bursts, and accompanied by a subtle tremor that shouldn't have been perceptible given the pavilion's apparent distance from the Vale Gardens. The moon opal's pulsing changed rhythm in response, urgency transitioning towards something closer to alarm. Determination crystallized within Lyra with sudden clarity that cut through the confusion and uncertainty. Rules, protocols, specialized training. None outweighed the simple fact that Cassius faced danger alone, while she remained safely contained within the pavilion's protective boundaries.
I'm going to him,
she announced, decision made beyond rational calculation or careful weighing of relative risks.
Containment or not, I can't stay here while he fights whatever's breaching the veil.
Zara nodded, acceptance requiring no persuasion or justification beyond Lyra's evident certainty.
How?
She asked simply. Practical focus on implementation rather than theoretical debate about a decision already made. Lyra considered their limited options. Analytical mind engaging despite the emotional urgency that had prompted the initial declaration. The pavilion's enhanced boundaries presented a significant obstacle, as did her unfamiliarity with Spirit Guild territory beyond what little she had observed during their arrival. The moon opal offered a potential solution, a connection to Cassius that transcended the physical space. The same link that allowed her to sense his struggle might potentially guide her to his location, regardless of intervening barriers or disorienting mist.
The opal will lead me,
she decided, fingers curling around the stone with renewed purpose.
If I can open myself to its guidance completely, rather than filtering impressions through conscious interpretation.
And the pavilion's containment?
Zara asked. Lyra moved toward the pavilion's entrance, hand rising to touch the seemingly ordinary wooden door that had imperceptibly transformed into a boundary between secure space and activated guild defenses. Not a physical lock, but a magical restriction designed to differentiate between recognized and unrecognized magical signatures.
Fire isn't just destruction,
she said quietly, the words emerging from years of private study and experimental application.
It's transformation. Change. Becoming rather than merely consuming.
Her fingers traced the door's surface with delicate precision, not attempting to burn through the physical barrier, but to transform the magical boundary's fundamental nature. Heat gathered beneath her touch, not chaotic flame, but controlled energy that seeped into the door's substance, temporarily altering its magical properties rather than its physical composition. For the briefest moment, the boundary forget its purpose. Transformation rather than breach, redefinition rather than destruction. The door swung open, revealing a mist-shrouded garden beyond.
I'll return when I find him,
Lyra promised, stepping through the temporary opening before it could recognize and correct the magical redefinition she had imposed upon it. The mist closed around her immediately, cutting off Zara's response and any glimpse of the pavilion she had just exited. Disorientation threatened as the familiar visual references disappeared, replaced by swirling vapor that concealed direction and distance with equal effectiveness. Lyra closed her eyes, fingers rising to touch the moon opal at her throat.
"Show me,"
she whispered, surrendering conscious navigation to the connection the stone represented.
"Lead me to him."
The opal pulsed once, cool energy seeming to spread from its surface down her arm and throughout her body. When she opened her eyes again, the mist remained, yet something had changed in her perception of it. Faint silver threads seemed to extend from the stone, not visible precisely but somehow perceivable, as if existing just beyond ordinary sight. She followed this tenuous connection, moving through garden paths that materialized only as she reached them and disappeared again once past. Distance and direction became meaningless concepts, progression measured in growing intensity of the moon opal's pulse rather than physical landmarks. The silver flashes grew more frequent, illuminating the mist with strobe-like effect that created momentary glimpses of the surrounding environment before plunging it back into concealing vapor. Each burst carried a distinct magical signature Lyra had come to recognize through their shared workings. Cassius's specific energy when accessing deeper spirit techniques beyond ordinary perception. A final, blinding flash tore through the mist with explosive force that momentarily cleared the concealing vapor to reveal a garden unlike any Lyra had previously encountered. Plants whose forms shifted between physical and spectral materiality surrounded a central clearing where the veil itself became visible. Not a metaphorical boundary, but an actual membrane between realities, a shimmering curtain of energy that rippled with disturbing motion like fabric under enormous pressure. Cassius stood before this membrane, hands extended in a complex gesture that maintained the silver barrier against the bulging distortion in the veil's surface. His violet eyes had clouded completely, spirit sight engaged as he fought to contain whatever pressed against the boundary from the other side. The pressure appeared overwhelming, the veil's distortion growing despite his obvious effort to reinforce its integrity. Silver energy flowed from his hands in a constant stream, patching weaknesses that formed faster than he could address them. Exhaustion showed in the subtle trembling of his arms, the strain evident across his features despite his trance-like focus. Fighting alone against a breach that threatened to overwhelm even his extraordinary abilities as arch-seer. As Lyra watched in horror, the distortion suddenly split, Not a complete tear, but a significant crack that allowed a glimpse of what waited beyond. Countless eyes stared through the opening, bodies pressing against the membrane with terrible hunger evident in their desperate efforts to widen the breach. Incubi and succubi in their true forms, beautiful yet horrifying, seductive yet predatory, hundreds massing where the veil had weakened. Not a random location, but a specific target. A pathway that would lead directly to Pyreholm if fully opened. Cassius's silver barrier strained against the widening crack, his strength clearly failing as the entities beyond pushed with collective force against his singular resistance. The breach expanded despite his desperate efforts, the silver energy growing thinner with each moment, as exhaustion claimed more of his reserves. Lyra's heart seized at the sight, fear for his safety transcending all other concerns. Without conscious decision, she moved forward, hands already gathering fire with instinctive precision that responded to the immediate threat rather than a careful consideration of an appropriate response.
Cassius,
she called, breaking his trance-like concentration with deliberate intrusion that risked disrupting his working. Yet it seemed necessary given his imminent collapse. His violet eyes cleared momentarily, his gaze finding her with mixture of surprise and alarm.
Lyra,
He gasped, the momentary distraction causing his silver barrier to weaken further.
you shouldn't be here. The containment
was insufficient against my determination to help you.
She finished for him, closing the distance between them with purposeful strides.
Tell me what to do. How to strengthen your barrier. How to help you close the breach.
Conflict played across his features, professional responsibility warring with his desperate need for assistance as the crack widened further despite his continued efforts.
It's not fire magic,
he warned, exhaustion evident in each labored breath.
The techniques require spirit perception beyond.
Then we'll create new technique.
Lyra interrupted, moving to stand beside him before the straining veil.
Fire and spirit together, like the banishment working. Harmony rather than separation.
The moon opal pulsed at her throat with a sudden warmth, the connection it represented flaring with renewed strength now that the physical proximity complemented their magical resonance. Something shifted in Cassius's expression, recognition beyond words passing between them as possibility crystallized amid the desperate situation.
Extension rather than replacement,
he suggested, scholarly mind engaging despite physical exhaustion and immediate danger.
Your fire providing energy for my spirit essence to expand.
Understanding flowed between them with remarkable ease. The connection they had established in the Ember Sanctuary providing a foundation for their collaborative working that required no elaborate explanation or formal instruction. Lyra's hands rose alongside his, fire gathering between her fingers with controlled precision that responded to his need rather than following her casting patterns.
Like tempered steel,
she suggested, shaping flame into lattice-like structure that intertwined with his silver barrier.
Strength through interweaving rather than rigid resistance.
Cassius nodded, understanding her intent with remarkable clarity given the technique's improvised nature. His silver energy flowed into the fire lattice, the elements combining to create a barrier unlike either could have produced alone. Not opposition, but harmony. Not competition, but complementary enhancement that multiplied their individual strengths beyond simple addition. The combined barrier pushed against the widening crack, fire and spirit together, creating a pressure that matched the entity's collective force from the other side. For a tense moment, neither gained advantage. A perfect stalemate between invasion and defense, breach and containment locked in precarious equilibrium. Then Cassius faltered, exhaustion finally claiming the critical portion of his remaining strength. His contribution to their combined working diminished, the silver energy flickering like a candle in a strong wind as his reserves approached complete depletion. Night wrapped the Spirit Guild in shadows deeper than ordinary darkness. Only the occasional shimmer of moonlight through mist-shrouded windows provided any illumination in the guest chambers where Lyra and Cassius had finally surrendered to exhaustion after the day's events. Lyra curled against Cassius's chest, her flame-red hair spilling across his skin like liquid fire against the pale moonlight. His steady heartbeat had lulled her into dreamless sleep, the first true rest she'd experienced since their harrowing battle at the Vale. The moon opal pulsed gently at her throat, its rhythm synchronized with both their breathing, a silent guardian of the connection they had forged. A soft sound, barely perceptible yet distinctly out of place, pulled Lyra from sleep's embrace. Her eyes opened to darkness, senses immediately alert despite lingering exhaustion. Cassius slumbered on, his features softened in repose, the day's trials temporarily forgotten in sleep's sanctuary. Another sound, a whisper of movement where none should exist. Lyra carefully disentangled herself from Cassius's arm, movements precise and controlled as she slipped from beneath the covers. He stirred slightly, murmuring something unintelligible, before settling deeper into exhaustion-claimed sleep. She watched him for a moment, reluctant to leave the warmth and security he represented, yet unable to ignore her instincts honed through years of navigating guild politics and their attendant dangers. The stone floor chilled her bare feet as she moved silently toward the bedchamber door, her simple sleeping shift offering little protection against the night air. The moon opal's cool presence against her throat provided curious comfort as she peered into the main chamber of their quarters, darkness concealing whatever had disturbed her rest. Shadows stretched long and unfamiliar across furniture rendered strange by night's transformation. Nothing appeared immediately out of place, yet the sensation of wrongness intensified rather than diminished as she scanned the seemingly empty room. She took a cautious step beyond the bedchamber threshold, hands ready to summon flame should threat materialize from the darkness. The main chamber remained still, moonlight creating silver pools across the floor that offered islands of visibility amid concealing shadows. A third step, and she sensed rather than saw movement to her left. Too late to react as a hand clamped violently over her mouth, fingers digging into her cheeks with bruising force. The palm pressed against her lips carried the unmistakable scent of ash and sulfur, and something darker, more primal. A hunger that transcended physical desire to touch essence itself.
"We finally found our master's little lost bird,"
whispered a voice against her ear, masculine yet wrong in ways that defied simple description. A voice designed to entice that instead revealed predatory intent beneath its surface charm. Terror froze Lyra momentarily as recognition crystallized with sickening clarity. Not human hand, but incubus touch. The entity they had banished, or another of its kind. Here within the Spirit Guild's supposedly impenetrable defenses. Before she could gather her magic, or attempt to break free, another figure resolved from the shadows before her. A woman whose features shifted subtly, even as Lyra watched. Beauty without fixed form, adapting to observers' specific desires. The succubus smiled, the expression containing nothing of genuine warmth, despite its perfect configuration.
Our master has sent us with a gift for such a naughty bird,
she purred, voice like honey poured over broken glass. Her hand rose to caress Lyra's cheek with a touch that should have been gentle, yet carried violation beneath its seeming tenderness. From within the folds of her shifting garment, the succubus withdrew a grotesque yet beautiful object. A collar of twisted gold, far crueler than the elegant necklace Alek had first placed around her throat. The familiar fire opal now sat embedded within the collar's center, burning with inner darkness that seemed to consume rather than emit light. A hunger made tangible through crystalline form. A heavy chain dangled from the collar's front, its links crafted from the same twisted gold. A leash for a captured pet. A tether to bind her to Alek's will once more. The sight paralyzed Lyra more effectively than any physical restraint. Her lungs seized mid-breath, her body going rigid with a primal terror that bypassed rational thought entirely. The collar represented more than physical confinement. It was the embodiment of everything she had fought to escape. A physical manifestation of ownership that sought not just her body, but her very soul. Images flashed unbidden through her mind. Herself following behind Alek like a prized pet, the chain's cold links wrapped around his fist, kneeling at his feet during council meetings while guild members pretended not to notice, being displayed as living trophy of his triumph over her attempted escape. The mental pictures sent waves of nausea through her belly, cold sweat breaking across her skin despite the night's chill. The succubus moved closer, the twisted golden collar extended toward Lyra's neck with purpose that carried ritual significance beyond simple restraint. Time seemed to slow as the fire opal approached, its burning darkness reaching toward her, with hungry anticipation that required no physical contact to communicate its intent. Panic exploded through Lyra's chest, heart hammering against her ribs with such force she feared it might shatter. The incubus's hand remained firmly clamped over her mouth, preventing the scream building in her throat from escaping. She struggled against his grip, but inhuman strength held her immobile as the collar inched closer to her vulnerable throat. Then, a miracle. As the twisted gold approached her skin, the moon opal at her throat flared with sudden brightness, its cool energy creating barrier between Lyra and the approaching collar. The fire opal recoiled as if burned, its inner darkness flaring with frustrated hunger as the succubus hissed in surprise.
"What is this?"
she demanded, beauty momentarily forgotten as frustration twisted her features into something closer to her true nature. The incubus's grip loosened slightly, his attention diverted by this unexpected resistance.
"Remove it,"
he ordered, hand falling away from Lyra's mouth as he pointed to the moon opal choker.
"Now, or suffer consequences beyond your limited imagination."
Freedom to speak returned, Yet Lyra hesitated between calling for help and attempting deception. Genuine terror transformed into calculated opportunity as she assessed their situation with rapidly clearing thoughts. The demons clearly needed her cooperation. Otherwise, they would have simply killed her or rendered her unconscious.
I can't,
she lied, voice trembling with fear that required no fabrication.
It's bound to me through spirit magic beyond my control.
The incubus's eyes narrowed, suspicion warring with necessity as he evaluated her claim.
Who controls it?
He demanded, fingers digging painfully into her arm.
Who holds your leash if not our master?
Before Lyra could formulate response, a soft sound emerged from the bedchamber. Cassius murmuring in his sleep. The noise barely audible, yet instantly drawing both demons' attention. The incubus's grip tightened painfully as realization transformed his borrowed features.
The spirit seer,
he hissed, recognition carrying rage beneath its surface calm.
Deal with him,
he ordered the succubus, already beginning to drag Lyra toward the chamber's exit. Desperation surged through her as the incubus pulled her away. Not just fear for herself, but terror at what the succubus might do to Cassius in his vulnerable state. A plan formed with surprising clarity despite her panic, words emerging before she could consider their full implications.
Wait,
she gasped, resistance making the demand more convincing.
Only my new master can remove the collar. Kill him and I will forever be his.
The demons froze, her unexpected declaration clearly disrupting whatever instructions they had received. The succubus glanced at her companion, silent communication passing between them that transcended ordinary language.
Our master did say to bring both the bird and her new cage,
the succubus mused, shifting features settling into a predatory smile that promised pain disguised as pleasure.
Perhaps we should bring him as well.
The incubus considered this, calculations evident beneath his borrowed human features.
Seduce the spirit seer,
he finally ordered.
Make him remove the binding, then we take the bird.
Relief threatened to betray Lyra's deception as the incubus released her from immediate departure, though his grip remained painfully tight around her arm. The succubus's smile deepened, her form already beginning to shift as she turned toward the bedchamber.
Watch this, little bird,
the incubus whispered against Lyra's ear, his breath hot with unnatural heat.
Watch as your protector falls to pleasures beyond his imagining.
Horror mingled with desperate hope as the succubus padded silently into the bedchamber, her form completing its transformation with disturbing accuracy. Where the demon had stood now, walked Lyra's perfect duplicate, flame-red hair cascading down her back, amber eyes catching moonlight with familiar warmth, every detail recreated with precision that transcended ordinary mimicry. The false Lyra approached the bed, where Cassius remained lost in exhausted sleep, unaware of the danger now sitting delicately beside his unconscious form. The succubus leaned close, lips near his ear as one hand traced patterns across his chest with calculated intimacy.
Cassius, my love,
she murmured, voice a perfect recreation of Lyra's distinctive cadence.
I need you.
He stirred slightly, consciousness returning with visible reluctance after the day's extraordinary exertions. The succubus continued her gentle assault, fingers moving to the ties of his sleeping robe with practiced precision.
Take me,
she whispered, undoing the first button at his throat, then the second, exposing more of his chest to the moonlight filtering through the windows. Lyra watched in horrified fascination, trapped in the incubus's iron grip as her duplicate seduced the man who had risked everything to save her from these very entities. The violation of seeing her own form used as weapon against him burned through her with cold fury that temporarily overwhelmed even her fear. Cassius's eyes finally opened, violet depths momentarily confused as sleep surrendered its claim on his consciousness. Recognition flickered across his features as he gazed up at what appeared to be Lyra leaning over him, her fingers continuing their work on his robe's buttons.
Lyra?
He murmured, voice rough with sleep, yet carrying warmth that transcended simple greeting. The succubus smiled, the expression a perfect mimicry of Lyra's, yet somehow wrong in subtle ways only someone who truly knew her might recognize.
I couldn't sleep,
she purred, hand sliding beneath the partially opened robe to touch bare skin beneath.
I'll ladder to you in a night.
He had no reason to doubt this Lyra's intentions. After all, it was her voice that had whispered to him. The succubus began to press gently against him, her movements evoking the dance of flames themselves, igniting a fire in Cassius's chest that he couldn't deny. Her fingers continued their descent down his body, untying knots with practiced ease as they reached the area near his heart.
I want you,
she whispered into his ear, each word drawing forth more intense desire from within him.
I need you. Your love.
He could feel the tension in her voice, a strain that spoke of an urgency beyond mere physical desire. Something deeper burned there, something akin to desperation that resonated with Cassius's own hidden longing. With deft hands, Lyra, or rather her double, popped open more buttons on his robe, allowing it to fall open and reveal more of Cassius's form to the moonlight. He felt no embarrassment at his vulnerability. In this moment, he was acutely aware of how little separated them from each other. Her hands moved lower now, brushing against his skin with feather-light caresses that sent shivers down his spine. The succubus leaned closer still and pressed her lips to the exposed skin above his stomach, drawing another button undone with her mouth rather than fingers. The sensation was electrifying, a mix of heat and coolness that left Cassius gasping for breath.
I want you too,
he managed to say, his voice as thick as molten lava.
more than anything.
The succubus lifted up slightly then, allowing moonlight to fully illuminate both their forms for the first time. Her gaze met his, and in those amber depths was a reflection of Lyra's own desire. Intense, consuming, and utterly compelling. The succubus continued to smile wickedly as she moved her head down, tracing her fingers along the edge of his abdomen before finally settling on another button near the waistband of his robe. She took a moment to gaze into Cassius's eyes while she did so, ensuring they were still locked together in their dance of lust. With an almost predatory grin, she slowly leaned down and began to pry another button open with her lips. Cassius gasped once more as he felt the loosened garment give way further under her assault. The succubus finally tore her gaze away from his face and looked downwards towards his crotch. Her eyes widened at what she saw, a large, flaccid bulge that strained against its confines beneath the now lazy folds of Cassius's robe. She let out a sultry moan at the sight, her fingers still teasing along the edge of his waistband. Cassius could only grit his teeth in response to her display of appreciation for him. The real Lyra, hidden in the other room, tried to speak once more, but was abruptly silenced when a hand clamped over her mouth. She felt herself being pulled inexorably closer to the incubus's chest as he pressed her tightly against him. Despite the fear that gripped her heart in those moments, Lyra couldn't help but feel the unmistakable pressure of something large pressing firmly against her thigh. Much larger and more substantial than any man she'd ever known. It seemed to be throbbing with its own desire even now, straining against the confines of its clothing. The succubus's dark gaze flicked back up to meet Cassius's, a silent promise of pleasure dancing in their depths as she slowly began to work on his remaining button. The succubus paused just before popping the final button open on Cassius's robe. She raised her gaze to meet his once more, a sultry smile still playing upon her lips as she slowly began to kiss her way up his stomach and chest. As she straddled him, Cassius felt an intense heat emanating from within the succubus's core, pressing against Cassius's tight muscles. With each slow, sensuous kiss, the succubus moved higher up Cassius's chest until her lips finally came to rest just beneath his jawline. He felt a shudder run through him at the gentle touch of her mouth against his skin, even as she continued to hold him tightly captive in her gaze. She slowly began to slide her robe off one shoulder, then the other, revealing her smooth and flawless skin to the moonlight that filtered into the room. As her breasts finally fell free from their confines, enchanting Cassius with their soft curves and inviting color, the succubus let out a moan of pleasure that seemed to reverberate through every cell in his body. The sound sent an electric jolt down his spine and made him ache for release even more than before. The succubus began to grind against his stomach, feeling the strong, tight muscles slide sensuously beneath her as she continued to undulate with a hypnotic rhythm. As she did so, she leaned closer until her lips were just barely brushing against Cassius's ear.
"I need you, Cassius,"
she whispered breathlessly, her voice almost lost in the heavy air that surrounded them both. As the succubus continued to pleasure herself against Cassius's abdomen, the real Lyra felt a wave of dread wash over her. She couldn't shake the feeling that Cassius had been enchanted by some supernatural force. Her heart sank lower with each passing moment, as the incubus's manhood seemed to grow larger and more insistent beneath her, pressing against the curve of her buttocks in its eagerness. It was a sensation both exhilarating and terrifying, leaving Lyra feeling all but completely lost. But just when she thought that all hope was truly lost, Cassius suddenly growled with a ferocity that sent shivers down Lyra's spine. With a swift, powerful movement that caught her off guard, he flipped the succubus over onto her back and pinned her beneath him. The succubus let out an involuntary moan of pleasure at the sudden display of aggression from Cassius. But when he ordered her to close her eyes, she hesitantly complied. Her eyelids fluttered shut in a slow, sensuous movement that sent another jolt through Lyra's heart. Lyra couldn't help but stare in disbelief as she watched this uncharacteristic behavior unfold before her. It was so very unlike the gentle and tender Cassius that she knew and loved. Something was undeniably wrong, and even as a part of her screamed to escape, another part of her refused to accept defeat. As these thoughts raced through her mind, Lyra struggled to hold on to her emotions, fighting back against the overwhelming sense of despair that threatened to consume her. She needed to find a way out of the situation, to break whatever enchantment had taken hold of Cassius and restore him to his true self, before it was too late.
Take me, Cassius.
The succubus let out another sultry moan as she pleaded, her voice dripping with desire and a wicked glimmer in her eyes. As the succubus spoke those words, Cassius's demeanor seemed to shift once again. He gripped both of the demoness's wrists firmly in one hand, while his other hand trailed down her neck, before moving towards the panties she still wore over her invitingly damp core. Lyra could feel utter defeat settling into her heart as she watched this unexpected display of dominance from Cassius. But just when all seemed lost, a miracle occurred. Instead of succumbing to temptation and removing the wet panties himself, Cassius's free hand began to glow with violet energy. The sorcery that flowed through his veins surged forth in an explosive burst, enveloping the succubus in magical silver chains that bound her wrists and ankles securely to the bed. The succubus let out a surprised moan as she found herself suddenly immobilized, unable to continue her seductive assault upon Cassius. A tense silence settled over the room, broken only by the soft rustle of the succubus's now constrained form as she struggled against her enchanted bonds. Then, with an air of grim determination, Cassius glared down at the succubus and demanded in a cold voice,
"Where is the real Lyra?"
The succubus's scream of rage bore no resemblance to Lyra's voice, her features shifting rapidly as fury disrupted the concentration required to maintain perfect mimicry. The beautiful woman dissolved into something else, not quite formless, but existing in state between defined boundaries. Beauty and horror simultaneously present in an arrangement impossible for human features. The incubus's grip on Lyra's arm slackened in shock at his companion's capture. In that instant of distraction, Lyra seized her opportunity. Drawing on years of precise magical control, she channeled fire to her fingertips and unleashed a concentrated blast directly into the incubus's face. Golden flames engulfed his head, briefly illuminating the chamber with harsh light. The incubus reeled backward, more startled than injured, his inhuman features rippling beneath the borrowed human mask as flames licked harmlessly across his fire-resistant skin. Still, the attack had achieved its purpose. His grip loosened completely, allowing Lyra to twist free and put distance between them.
"Cassius,"
she called, backing toward the bedchamber where he stood over the bound succubus. Her hands remained extended before her, flames dancing between her fingers with controlled precision that reflected years of disciplined practice. The incubus recovered quickly, his borrowed human features melting away like wax under flame to reveal the horned, fire-skinned entity beneath.
"Foolish bird,"
he snarled, eyes burning with inner light as he advanced toward her.
"Fire cannot harm one born of flame's darkest aspects."
Lyra knew he spoke truth. Her magic would have limited effect against an entity partially composed of fire essence. Yet she stood her ground, gathering another spell between her palms.
"Perhaps not,"
she acknowledged, the fireball growing larger between her hands.
But it can certainly slow you down.
She released the spell with perfect timing, the concentrated flame striking the incubus square in the chest, just as Cassius emerged from the bedchamber, his hands already weaving complex patterns that left silver trails in the air. The incubus staggered backward under the combined assault, his form briefly destabilizing before reforming with angry purpose.
Lyra, down!
Cassius shouted. She dropped instantly, years of academy combat training allowing her to respond without hesitation. Above her, a silver whip of pure spirit energy lashed through the space she had occupied, striking the incubus across his partially corporeal form. Unlike her fire, the spirit energy drew a genuine howl of pain from the demon, leaving a smoldering wound across his chest that leaked molten essence like burning blood.
Spirit magic.
The incubus spat, eyes narrowing with hatred as he assessed this more dangerous opponent.
Your kind always did fight dirty.
Cassius didn't waste breath responding to the taunt. His hands continued their complex movements, the silver whip dissolving and reforming into spinning discs of spirit energy that he sent slicing toward the demon with deadly precision. The incubus dodged with inhuman speed, the discs embedding themselves in the walls behind him with impacts that shook the entire chamber. Lyra rolled to her feet, positioning herself to flank the incubus from the opposite side. Her fire might not harm him directly, but it could limit his movement, creating opportunities for Cassius's more effective attacks. She unleashed a continuous stream of flame that formed a barrier between the incubus and the chamber's exit, forcing him further into the room.
The binding won't hold her much longer,
Cassius warned, nodding toward the bedchamber where the trapped succubus thrashed against her silver restraints. The spirit bonds were visibly weakening, stretched thin by the demon's determined resistance. The incubus seized a heavy chair, hurling it toward Cassius with such force that the wooden furniture splintered in midair. Cassius deflected most of the debris with a hastily erected shield of silver energy, but a few fragments broke through, one cutting his cheek with a glancing blow that left a thin line of blood against his pale skin. Lyra responded with a precisely aimed bolt of concentrated heat that struck the stone floor beneath the incubus's feet. Though the demon himself resisted her fire, the floor did not. The sudden thermal expansion caused the stone to crack explosively, throwing the incubus off balance long enough for Cassius to land another punishing blow with his reconstituted spirit whip. The molten wounds across the incubus's form multiplied, his essence leaking from multiple injuries that would have killed any mortal being. Yet the demon fought on with undiminished ferocity, desperation lending strength to his increasingly wild attacks. With a sudden change in tactics, the incubus lunged not toward either of them but toward the bedchamber doorway. Before either could intercept him, he seized the heavy wooden bed frame and heaved it through the doorway with a strength that defied his increasingly wounded state. The massive piece of furniture smashed against the far wall with thunderous impact, splintering into kindling.
My hero?
Purred the succubus as she rose from the wreckage, silver bonds dissolving as the physical structure they had been anchored to disintegrated. Her beautiful form rippled, patches of her true nature showing through in glimpses of something ancient and hungry beneath the pleasure-crafted exterior.
Save your gratitude for later,
the incubus snarled, backing toward her as Cassius and Lyra advanced from opposite sides, their magics ready for renewed assault.
We need the collar and retreat.
The succubus's gaze fell on the twisted gold collar she had dropped during her capture, now lying forgotten near the chamber's far wall.
Such a shame to leave without our prize.
She pouted, her voice a disturbing mixture of feminine allure and predatory hunger.
Though I must admit being bound was unexpectedly stimulating.
Her eyes fixed on Cassius with unsettling intensity.
Perhaps next time you'll let me return the favor, pretty spirit seer.
There won't be a next time,
Cassius replied, silver energy gathering between his hands with increasing intensity.
You don't belong in this realm.
The chamber door burst open before either demon could respond. 3 spirit mages rushing in with hands already weaving complex defensive patterns. Their sudden appearance confirmed what Lyra had hoped. The commotion had finally drawn attention from the wider guild. The incubus assessed their deteriorating situation with cold calculation, then made a decisive move. With inhuman speed, he snatched up the twisted gold collar, its chain dangling from his clawed hand like a grotesque trophy. The succubus pressed against him, her form already beginning to shift in ways that defied natural physical limitations.
This isn't over, little bird,
the incubus hissed, his gaze locking with Lyra's across the chamber.
Our master still hungers for what is his.
Before anyone could stop them, both demons underwent a horrific transformation. Their flesh rippled and tore, leathery wings erupting from their backs with wet, tearing sounds that sent shivers down Lyra's spine. The succubus's beautiful features elongated into a bat-like muzzle, while the incubus's horns curved backward into ram-like spirals. With a sound like tearing silk, they launched themselves toward the chamber's largest window. Glass shattered outward as they crashed through, their twisted forms silhouetted briefly against the night sky before darkness swallowed them completely. The twisted gold collar and its embedded fire opal disappeared with them, the chain's links catching the moonlight one final time as they vanished into the night.